Today at 1, Boris Johnson faces calls to bring in tighter COVID restrictions in England over Christmas in the battle against the Omicron variant. As the booster drive continues, he'll hold a virtual cabinet meeting this afternoon to assess different options for tighter rules.
If we need to change the approach, can't rule it out definitively, but that will be reliant on the data that comes through.
Labour is urging the government to set out as soon as possible any detailed plan for how to combat the rise in infections.
There's a vacuum of leadership at the moment. The infighting is going on in the Tory party, when the focus should really be on the public interest and public health.
And there's more criticism after a picture emerges of Boris Johnson in the Downing Street garden with staff during the first national lockdown. Number 10 says it was a work meeting. But how are other countries coping with the Omicron variant in the run-up to Christmas? We'll take a closer look. Also this lunchtime, the Red Cross says it's complete carnage in some coastal areas of the Philippines after Typhoon Myrie kills more than 300 people. Warding off a lonely Christmas, virtual reality carols for those unable to go to church. And Australia demolish England to go 2-0 up in the Ashes.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, Tottenham are out of the Europa Conference League after UEFA ruled they forfeited their match against Rennes. That game was called off because of a COVID outbreak.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Cabinet is expected to meet in the next hour as the Prime Minister faces calls to bring in tighter COVID restrictions in England to combat the rising numbers of infections due to the Omicron variant. Today, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, again refused to rule out tougher rules over Christmas. The BBC has been told civil servants have prepared 3 different options ranging in severity, with Boris Johnson likely to face strong opposition to further restrictions from within his own party. Here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Booster jabs are still the main hope in the battle against Omicron. But as cases of the new variant continue to rise, ministers won't rule out taking further measures.
We're accelerating the booster rollout in various different ways, from halving the time between second and third doses, increasing the throughput through the vaccination centres. They're going to be open longer hours. And of course, if we need to change the approach, can't rule it out definitively, but that will be reliant on the data that comes through.
With just a few days to go until Christmas, there's anxiety that plans may have to change. Labour are calling for clarity.
Here we are with a variant that everybody's very, very concerned about. And what I want to see is a government, a Prime Minister, that gets a grip and puts a plan forward that hopefully we can all get behind. But where is he? There's a vacuum of leadership at the moment. The infighting is going on in the Tory party, when the focus should really be on the public interest and public health.
The Prime Minister has a choice. Officials have drawn up 3 different options for further restrictions, ranging in severity from low to medium to high. The decision to implement restrictions will never be an easy one, but the political pressure on Boris Johnson right now, particularly from his own party, will make it harder than ever.
Good morning.
The former Brexit Minister Lord Frost resigned at the weekend, in part over the current COVID restrictions.
I can't speak for anybody else. I can only say what I think, which is that I don't support coercive policies on COVID. The Prime Minister's got some very difficult decisions to take, and I'm sure he'll be thinking very hard of them.
His concerns are shared by many Conservative MPs, deeply wary of any further measures.
I just don't think at the moment that there is any justification for further measures. Of course, people must be sensible. They only need to meet where it's reasonable to do so, and they must consider getting the vaccination. But I think we're asking the good sense of the British people to do that, rather than further government edicts at the moment.
And there's this, a picture taken of the Prime Minister and staff in the garden of Number 10 in May, according to The Guardian, when restrictions on mixing were in place. Wine, a cheese board, a work meeting, says Downing Street. Labour say that's a stretch. There are differences of opinion in government about what action, if any, is needed now. Ministers are meeting this afternoon to review the latest data.
And Jonathan, then, lots of speculation about differing options for tighter rules. What could we be looking at, do you think?
Well, Clive, I think we just need to look back to earlier stages in the pandemic when we had everything from a full lockdown in place with businesses closed, schools closed as well, and strict limits on socialising and household mixing, through to a much more lighter touch with guidance in the place of rules, suggesting what it's sensible for people to do. And of course, there are many different options in between that. But I think at this point we should caution against sensing or assuming that any of that is inevitable, because it just isn't, frankly. What you have here is essentially a bit of a trade-off between acting preemptively against the risk that hospitalisations could go up, people fall severely ill with the Omicron variant, and guarding against that unsustainable pressure that we could see on the NHS, and waiting and hoping and crossing fingers, hopefully, that it won't be as bad as all that. The Prime Minister is the one with a decision to make amid intense political pressure on him now. Ministers are meeting this afternoon, and at some point their eyes will turn to him for a decision to be made.
OK, Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Blake there live at Westminster. Well, ministers have again called on anyone eligible to get a coronavirus booster jab to get the job done. Bookings have now opened for children aged 12 to 15 in England to get their second dose of vaccine. It comes as one NHS leader warns pressure on hospital trusts in London is mounting rapidly. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
The race to get booster jabs into as many arms as possible is intensifying. Yesterday saw more than 900,000 boosters delivered, thanks in part to mass vaccination centres like this one in Manchester, where they've been operating around the clock as part of a trial to see how people responded, averaging around 60 jabs an hour through the night.
It's either this or I've come from any time between 5 past midnight, so it was the most reasonable time.
Later it's going to be queue, and also because I'm available this morning, I'm not working this morning.
Duty calls, I've got work at about 8, 9, so figured it's best to get it out of the way.
A huge publicity campaign is also underway. This morning, national newspapers carrying an identical message to add to TV appeals that have already been running. But the logistics of ramping up a mass vaccination campaign so quickly are complicated, with London in particular experiencing problems with supply.
We luckily had enough already in the fridge to do a very busy Saturday clinic. We gave over 400 doses on Saturday, but then we had to stop, and we are desperately hoping we get the delivery later today for tomorrow's clinic.
One of the main reasons for the sense of urgency is the extra pressure this new wave could heap on an already creaking health service. It's not just extra patients, but staff themselves falling ill. In London, the NHS has seen staff absences rise from 1,900 to 4,700 in less than a week.
In many places, they are already under immense pressure, and so they are starting to go off sick themselves, both with COVID, but also with physical and mental exhaustion. So it is looking like a very bleak picture for them over the next few weeks.
I'm just going to take that blood sample, okay?
At the start of this year, hospitals were overwhelmed as the number of COVID patients surged. Now vaccines and boosters seem to be keeping the number of deaths stable, at least for the moment. But modelling suggests even a best-case scenario for this wave could see deaths rise to around 600 a day.
There is very little headroom, I think, for the number of cases to go up and the number of severe cases to go up too, even in the best-case scenario.
But some good news today on the effectiveness of boosters. Moderna say new tests show its jab can increase neutralising antibodies about 37-fold, reinforcing the message that boosters remain the best weapon against the Omicron variant. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Business bosses have called on the government to provide urgent help as customers stay away due to rising COVID infections. The rapid spread of the Omicron variant has seen numerous cancellations at many bars and restaurants, with the boss of the Green King pub chain warning that the country was in lockdown in all but name due to government messaging around reducing social contact. Meanwhile, some venues have also been forced to close because of staff needing to self-isolate, with the Natural History Museum shutting its doors for a week. Our business editor Simon Jack is here. Simon, businesses are anxious, no question about that. Some saying they're on the edge.
Yeah, they're very keen to stress that whether or not, whatever comes out of this cabinet meeting we've got this afternoon, they need urgent help. You've got the hospitality industry saying 10,000 venues could close unless they get further assistance. We've had this morning some footfall figures about how many people are out. 8.5% down on last week in our city centres. That's 25% down on pre-pandemic levels. Now, the government's position has always been, listen, you're not locked down, you can open, so support is tied to that. And as you were just saying, and many people say, with consumer confidence and commuter numbers evaporating with the higher infection and some of the health messaging, we might as well be locked down, and we need to be treated as if we are. Now, they're asking for cash flow help because that's the thing. They've got to pay staff bills, soaring energy bills. They've just stocked their larders, their fridges are bulging, the cellars are full, and the cancellations are running at between 40 and 80%. So they're saying we need help whatever happens, and we're expecting something to come out. The government's in a bit of dilemma. It wants to wean the economy off an idea that the Treasury is always there as a backstop when anything bad happens. But having spent hundreds of billions on saving many businesses, if they go to the wall now, will those billions have been wasted?
Indeed. OK, Simon, thank you. Simon Jack there. Well, what's been the response of other countries to the rapid spread of the Omicron variant in the run-up to Christmas? In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue in Washington and Andrew Harding, who's in Johannesburg. But first, let's go live to The Hague in the Netherlands and our correspondent Anna Holligan. Who's there? Anna.
And here's a snapshot of life under lockdown. All the cafes, bars, restaurants, museums and gyms are now closed, and there's no Christmas shopping either. All of the non-essential shops have been shut down, although the off-licences and florists around here are open, so essential, open to interpretation. The schools closed early for Christmas. People are being asked to work from home. And the timing is really telling here, because these rules were introduced just a week before Christmas, throwing people's holiday plans into disarray. And it really highlights the urgency and the fear still swirling around Omicron, the uncertainties about things like the transmissibility and the potential to evade people's immunity. Across the border in Germany, travellers from the UK have been banned from entering unless they're German residents or Germans flying in from the UK. Those who do go have to show a negative test and enter quarantine regardless of their vaccination status, and similar restrictions in France. And what all of this shows is that, along with Omicron, the emergence of a realisation that coming together this Christmas will be harder and riskier than anyone had anticipated. Let's cross now to my colleague Gary O'Donoghue, who's in Washington.
Scientists here are warning of a viral blizzard about to hit the country as Omicron starts to take over as the dominant variant of COVID-19. It's in 45 of the 50 states already and is spreading rapidly. It's already having an impact on sporting events such as the National Hockey League that has cancelled several dozen matches, the NBA, the NFL as well. Even the famous Hamilton musical on Broadway has had to cancel some of its shows. Now, in terms of the vaccination rates here, they are stubbornly going up very, very slowly. Only 85% of people in this country have had a single dose. Only 72% are double vaccinated. Of the double vaccinated, only 30% have had that booster shot so far. Another shocking statistic, only 1.6 million doses of any kind, be that a first, second or booster jab, being given each day at the moment. On that rate, it'll take a year at least to get the population boosted. Now, Joe Biden is going to make a speech tomorrow announcing some more help for underserved communities, urging people to get their vaccinations. But plans, for example, to have vaccine mandates for employers, they've been mired in the courts. Now let's take a look at the situation in South Africa. Here's my colleague Andrew Harding in Johannesburg.
Thanks, Gary. South Africa, of course, is the place where Omicron was first detected. So there's a lot of interest in how things are unfolding here. And so far, the outlook is broadly very encouraging. Hospital admissions are still a tiny fraction of what they were at the same point as in previous waves. The same goes for the official death rate from Omicron, which is dramatically lower than, say, for Delta. And the latest figures suggest that this fourth wave, which rose so steeply, is already starting to dip here in South Africa. But we still need to be cautious. For a start, the official death toll is probably a significant underestimate, perhaps by a factor of 3. And we still don't know why Omicron seems to be leaving this country relatively unscathed. Is it a sign that the variant is less severe, or could it be that so many South Africans were exposed to previous variants and enjoy some immunity as a result, even if vaccination levels here remain pretty low? Or is it simply the fact that this is a much younger population, the average age about 13 years younger than in Britain? Either way, mask wearing remains strictly enforced here in public, but no other major restrictions have yet been brought in by the government. Clive, back to you.
OK, Andrew, thank you for that. Andrew Harding there, live in Johannesburg, Gary O'Donoghue in Washington and Anna Holligan at The Hague. Many thanks. It is now 1:15. Our top story this lunchtime. And ministers are set to hold talks as Boris Johnson faces calls to bring in tighter COVID restrictions in England over Christmas. And coming up, the Premier League holds emergency discussions on the impact of rising COVID infections on the football season.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, Rafa Nadal tests positive for COVID-19 after an exhibition event in Abu Dhabi. The 20-time Grand Slam champion was making his comeback from injury ahead of the Australian Open next month.
Police in the Philippines say the number of people who've died after Typhoon Myrie hit last week has risen to more than 350. The Red Cross says it's carnage in many areas with no power, no communications and very little water. Thousands of military, Coast Guard and fire service personnel have been deployed to help in the relief operation. With the very latest from the capital, Manila, here's Howard Johnson.
4 days on from Super Typhoon Myrie's first landfall in the Philippines, the extent of the damage it caused is finally becoming clear. 9 different islands, separated by a distance of more than 800 kilometres, all experienced sustained ferocious winds and heavy rain, flattening thousands of homes and flooding vast tracts of land.
Tsaka kahit konting tulong man lang na
We appeal for at least some small help to come to us. Now is the time that we need a government that is ready to help us in our current situation. We are waiting for whoever has a kind heart. I hope they will help us.
The breadth of the destruction and the lack of communication lines is causing logistical delays in humanitarian support. Food, water, fuel and electricity are in limited supply on numerous islands. Today, the British government committed nearly $1 million to an appeal by the International Federation of the Red Cross to help the relief effort. The IFRC are hoping to raise a total of more than $20 million. Howard Johnson, BBC News, Manila.
Voters in Chile have elected the country's youngest ever president. Gabriel Boric, a left-wing former student activist who's 35, won 56% of the vote. He told jubilant supporters he'd reform society but keep the economy stable. His victory over his far-right rival comes after 2 years of mass protests against inequality and corruption. Pro-China candidates have claimed victory in Hong Kong's elections as official figures show a record low turnout. Just over 30% of those eligible cast their ballots. Activists had called for a boycott because every candidate had been vetted for their loyalty to Beijing before being allowed to stand. Now, a local council has been accused of dumping vulnerable people after several deaths in one set of flats used as temporary accommodation outside the city. Brighton and Hove City Council has moved hundreds of homeless people out of the area, which experts say takes them away from vital support networks. One of those who died had mental health issues and took her own life. Brighton says it doesn't usually place people with serious need outside its catchment area. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has the story.
This is Kendall Court, a block of 54 bedsits that Brighton Council uses to accommodate homeless people. It's 10 miles outside the city in Newhaven, and the council have been repeatedly told it's not suitable for vulnerable people.
If you could imagine a mental health ward with no staff, yes, that was Kendall Court.
Margaret Winter's daughter Robin Rockman was placed in Kendall Court after applying for emergency housing in Brighton. A mature student, she was deemed vulnerable due to mental health problems, which deteriorated at Kendall Court. Just 3 weeks after being placed in the block, she took her own life.
I don't think she really wanted to die. I read her Facebook messages. In one of them, she said, "I don't want to die. I just don't know how to live." It's not suitable, certainly, for anyone who's vulnerable, who needs access to out-of-hours emergency mental health services. They should recognise that some people need more help than just a bed.
At least 10 Kendall Court residents have died since 2016, the most recent earlier this month. The people here often have complex needs, psychiatric or drug and alcohol problems.
Once you're put here and you get to see the people that are here and what goes on, it's like it's a dumping ground.
Leon Rose has lived here for 18 months after being released from prison. While he's grateful for the accommodation, like many others, he feels isolated from his family in Brighton.
There's no point putting someone somewhere and just forget about them. You know what I mean? When you put someone somewhere and it's temporary accommodation, surely you've got to be there to help them to move on to progress to better premises.
And it's not just Newhaven. Brighton have moved people to hotels in Eastbourne too, at least 3 of whom have also died.
Being moved out of area is exceptionally difficult for people.
Dr Tim Worthley is a Brighton GP who was cared for some of those who lived in the city but died elsewhere.
We've had people often moved out of area with severe mental health needs, with heart failure or with terminal cancer. We have people on the phone with us sobbing, really desperate for them to be moved back into the area so they can receive the care and support that they need.
Brighton has a significant homeless population, and the council say the scale of accommodation needed is greater than they can provide within the city. But neighbouring councils are now considering legal action to force Brighton to provide more care to those it moves elsewhere.
It simply stretches belief to breaking point that they couldn't have found an alternative site within the whole of Brighton and Hove to place these people. So there does seem to be somewhere along the line a lack of will to actually sort this problem out.
Brighton and Hove councils say they have a team of welfare officers supporting people in temporary accommodation and do not usually place someone with major care needs outside the city. They also rejected claims that Kendall Court was unsuitable for accommodating homeless people. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Sussex. And if you've experienced any of the issues in that report, just go to BBC's Action Line service. Now, a 63-year-old man has been sentenced to an indefinite hospital order after being found responsible last month for the death of a fellow resident at a care home in southeast London. Our correspondent June Kelly is live at the Old Bailey for us this afternoon. June, just remind us of the background to this case.
Well, Clive, Alexander Rawson was in a mental health unit this time last year. He was under the care of the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. During his time in the mental health unit, he'd actually threatened staff with a knife and with scissors. But this time last year, in the run-up to Christmas, it was decided that he should be moved into Fieldside Care Home in Catford in southeast London. Now, once in the home, he was very distressed and he actually frightened a member of staff. And then in the first week of the new year, he attacked Eileen Dean. This is a 93-year-old lady who was in the room next door. He beat Mrs. Dean with his walking stick. And the member of staff who found her said she appeared to mouth the word help. Now, Mrs. Dean suffered catastrophic injuries to her head and body. She died some hours later in hospital. Alexander Rawson was deemed unfit to stand trial here at the Old Bailey last month. Instead, a jury listened to the evidence and decided he was responsible for Eileen Dean's death. And today he's been given this indefinite hospital order. Today in court, we had a very powerful statement from Georgie Hampshire. She is the daughter of Eileen Dean, and she said her mum and the whole family had been let down by everyone who had decided to place Alexander Rawson in Fieldside Care Home.
June, thank you. June Kelly there live at the Old Bailey. The Church of England is releasing a series of virtual reality carols today, featuring the choir of London St Martin in the Fields Church. As the threat of tighter COVID restrictions looms this Christmas, the idea is part of a wider focus on online worship for those who can't attend services in person and those who may be lonely. Here's Harry Farley.
Online worship that has had to happen through COVID has been a gift from my family particularly. The last decade, grief, questions, questioning faith. It would be an understatement to say that things haven't been easy.
The Reverend Charlotte Cheshire is a priest in Huddersfield.
My husband Chris died in April 2020, so just a few weeks into the first lockdown for the pandemic.
She's left with her 11-year-old son, Adam.
Wow! Oh, hang on. Wow!
He has severe learning difficulties, as well as being hearing and visually impaired.
Adam is absolutely gorgeous when he's happy. Yeah! Wow! When he is struggling or overwhelmed, it's like having Jekyll and Hyde. Imagine a terrible 2 tantrum in the body of someone who weighs 11 stone. Christmas present? Yeah! Wow! For all of the years that Adam has been part of my family, trying to worship has been difficult. Prior to COVID, I would have said that church is nearly impossible for us.
But that has changed with the advent of online and now virtual reality worship.
One of the reasons we're interested in doing virtual reality is we've seen a massive increase in the number of people engaging with online worship, and we were thinking, what's the next step? We're seeing that people who don't normally come to church are engaging online as the way that they start to explore faith.
The Church of England is in a battle to reverse a terminal decline in attendance. One hope is that digital worship, and virtual reality in particular, will be a step towards in-person worship for people who have left the pews. Harry Farley, BBC News.
Premier League bosses are holding emergency talks with all 20 clubs today after a number of matches were cancelled due to COVID outbreaks among players. The Christmas period is one of the busiest of the footballing season. Well, our correspondent Laura Scott is at the Premier League's HQ in West London. Laura, what options are on the table?
Well, quite simply, Clive, the debate will be whether it's safe and sensible to continue with the Premier League season. 6 of the weekend's 10 scheduled top-flight games had to be postponed due to COVID outbreaks among squads. And rising cases within the league has given rise to calls for a circuit breaker, effectively pausing the season for 1 or more match rounds. The Premier League's approach to date has been to continue with the current fixture schedule where safely possible, and they're expected to maintain that position today, knowing that if they were to postpone games, that rearranging them will be difficult in an already congested season. But some managers have said that a circuit breaker is necessary in the interests of player welfare. The Chelsea manager Thomas Tuchel said the fact his side played yesterday was a huge risk. We know the captains and the managers will meet with the Premier League later in the week, and we are expecting new vaccination figures from the Premier League and testing figures later today, which could be very telling indeed. Certainly not an easy discussion, and there is a real split of views within the league.
OK, Laura, thank you for that. Now, Australia have won the second Ashes Test, beating England by 275 runs. The tourists had a mountain to climb, needing to bat the whole day to avoid falling behind 2-0 in the series. But despite some spirited resistance from Joss Buttler, they were eventually bowled out for 192. It means England face a huge challenge to win back the Ashes. Here's Patrick Geary.
So to the last Englishman standing in Adelaide, a lonely place on the other side of the world. At the other end from Mitchell Starc, edge. Ollie Pope didn't last 10 minutes, 5 wickets left. The biggest of them was Ben Stokes, so Australia's fielders made an enclosure around him, then sent in a Lyon. Nathan Lyon thought he had him trapped LBW, the umpire didn't. Australia reviewed, then rejoiced.
Wickets hitting.
England reset. Chris Woakes made a defiant 44. Jos Buttler, a natural cavalier, relied on his shield. No wicket fell for more than 2.5 hours. Say it quietly, maybe. But English optimism on this tour is no sooner formed than shattered.
Oh, too good.
The end of Woakes and ultimately hope. The Aussies were closing in. Ollie Robinson lasted an hour before Lyon got him. Still, perhaps improbably, the match went into its final session. Still there, Buttler, the Adelaide barricade. For 206 balls, he hardly put a foot wrong.
Oh, he's trying on a stump. Oh, he has.
Watch the lights on the bails. Hit wicket. What a way to go. Jai Richardson's 5th wicket finished the job for the Aussies.
Australia win the Test match. They go up 2-0 in the Ashes.
Today marks 4,000 days since England last won a Test in Australia. To regain the Ashes, they must somehow win the next 3. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. It's Christmas week. Is it going to be white, Matt?
It is. The run-up is upon us, and I think many are wanting it to be white. But I'll tell you something, the atmosphere is not going to make it an easy job for us forecasters this week. Let me just take you quickly to the big day to show you what is going on. It's going to be a battle, not of the Christmas number ones, but of air masses. Mild air mass to the south, no snow there. Cold air to the north, potentially, but no guarantee of snow. But in between, it's where those battle lines are drawn, is where we could see a mixture of sleet and snow. And that dividing line, a bit further north, a bit further south, can make all the difference. We'll keep you updated. But certainly that cold fight back will come later in the week after a milder spell as we go through the middle part of this week. Out there at the moment, though, a very familiar picture out the window. It's very grey, it's pretty chilly, but there is some sunshine across the Highlands, Grampians of Scotland, the northwest of Northern Ireland, and through parts of Gwynedd and Anglesey. And the shades of grey lightening a little bit across the south too. But it's a cold day. Temperatures mid-single figures for many of you. And tonight, the cloud will sit in place for the most part. But where you've got the clear skies to end the day, you'll have clear skies tonight and greatest chance of some frost, showing up by the blue colours on the chart, mainly on the hills. But even where the cloud sits in place, 1-2 degrees tomorrow morning, it will be a chilly start to Tuesday. And of course, the winter solstice. It's the day of shortest day length. 5 hours, 49 minutes. That's all in Lerwick. 2 hours more in Haverfordwest. But it is the start of the days starting to draw out a bit more once again. So a bit of positivity there. And for the winter solstice, maybe a little bit more sunshine compared with today, particularly in the west, where there'll be a bit more breeze. Wales, Western England later in the south, and a bit more sunshine in the far north of Scotland. But here, just 1 or 2 showers. Sunshine or not, though, it's still another chilly day at this stage. And for some across eastern areas, it could get a bit colder as we go through into Wednesday. Greater chance of a frost Tuesday night into Wednesday. But this big area of low pressure out in the Atlantic is going to try to bring some milder changes. Initially across the west, Northern Ireland, Wednesday, rain on and off, into western Scotland later. Maybe a little bit of rain, Isle of Man and western Wales. Further east, there will be some sunshine, but here temperatures only struggling around 3 or 4 degrees, whereas looking at 9s, 10s across these western parts. That mild air winds out, preceded by a little bit of snow in the hills of Scotland, and then another batch of rain pushes its way up for Thursday. Greater chance of some rain across England at this stage, followed on by sunshine across the south and a big divide in temperatures. Most of us in the mild air, but that cold air, as I said, will fight back. Keep up to the latest on your BBC weather app, online as well. And don't forget, online, we have Thomas giving a reality check on how those weather apps work. Clive.
OK, Matt, many thanks. Matt Taylor there. And a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. And ministers are set to hold talks as Boris Johnson faces calls to bring in tighter COVID restrictions in England over Christmas. That's it. So, goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.